Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our peer connections on affordable and accessible housing. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we live and work on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we must recognize the importance of the land and our treaty agreements. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. As our Spinal Cord Injury Ontario community encompasses many geographies, we ask that everyone take a few moments of their day to find out which unceded or treated territories you may live and work on. You can use the link www.native-land.ca to learn more, and Justpreet will put that into the chat box. So my name is Julie. I am a peer support coordinator for Spinal Cord Injury Ontario in the London region. My behind the scenes co-host today is Justpreet. She is also a peer support coordinator, but she is in the Toronto region. So just a few things before we start. As I had mentioned, we are going to be recording this session. So if you do not wish to be seen, please just ensure that your camera is turned off. We will also be keeping everyone on mute throughout, just to cut down on the background noise. In saying that, we do welcome questions at any time. So if you do have any questions for anyone that is presenting, you can either use the raise hand feature that's usually at the bottom of your screen, or you can use the chat box as well. So we'll be monitoring that throughout. So we've got some great speakers lined up today to talk with us. So we will first hear from Peter, who is our Director of Public Policy. He is going to be discussing what SCIO is doing in relation to affordable and accessible housing. We'll then hear from Sheri, who is one of our service navigation coordinators in the York region. And then that will be followed by Vix, who is a peer that is going to be sharing their lived experience. So I will let Peter take it from here to let you know a little bit about what SCIO is doing, sorry.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone. A bit of background just to put some context around accessible housing for Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. Last year, the organization went through a comprehensive strategic planning process where we interviewed a variety of different people, participated in an array of surveys to really get an understanding of what our community wanted our organization to work on from an advocacy perspective. And accessible and affordable housing was identified as the #1 priority for the organization. So this is something that we're going to be digging into over the course of 3 years, if not more, to do our best to create better equity and to level off the playing field in terms of accessible and affordable housing in Ontario and as well as Canada. We define accessible and affordable housing internally within SCIO as a crisis. We believe that there's in fact a crisis going on in Ontario and Canada with respect to accessing accessible housing in this province. We've done a variety of different investigations and explored different research to understand the landscape of accessible housing in Ontario. And what we've initially realized is that there really isn't very clear data or very clear research or a very clear understanding of what the accessible housing stock and what the future holds for accessibility in this province, which is kind of worrisome, considering there's approximately one new spinal cord injury every week in Ontario. Many of us go through rehabilitation and suddenly are looking for an accessible home, and we have pretty much 3 months to find one. And if we can't find one, we're stuck in hospitals, stuck in long-term care facilities, potentially stuck in shelters. and stuck living with loved ones when you don't want to be living with loved ones. And really, it's not really a good way to start a process of recovery when experiencing a traumatic situation like a spinal cord injury. So we definitely got a road ahead of us to make an impactful change. Um, this is a very tough topic. Um, most of the funding that comes for housing in this country comes from the federal government and gets downloaded to the provinces, and then in turn gets downloaded from the provinces to the municipal governments. And it's the municipal governments that are working with developers to hit the ground running on what a building can look like, let alone whether it's accessible or not. So you're dealing with three layers of government to actually make an impactful change. There's also very weak regulations for accessible housing. Often the only lever for informing how people are building housing in this country is designed by the Ontario Building Code and the National Building Code, um, which doesn't really allow for anything more than just accessing through doors and turning radiuses and potentially some accesses through washrooms and handbars. It doesn't get into assistive devices. It doesn't get into environmental controls. It doesn't really inform inside the home versus the more so just the structure of what the building should allow. Um, Recently, my colleague Nicoletta, who's on the call with us, put together a successful proposal to the University of Toronto through the Public Good Initiative, and she and her team of student consultants just completed a global review of all the regulations across the world around who's doing housing well, accessible housing well, and who's not. And the results are really staggering. Recognizing that, there's not a very clear country that is actually doing this really well. So we do have our work ahead of us. I haven't analyzed the report. Maybe Nicoletta in the comments section can provide more insight on which countries are doing better. I just don't have the report in front of me to share some of the results. Um, but we've recently done that work. We also have engaged in multiple partnerships to help us figure out how we're going to move forward. Um, our main partner is the Sunnybrook Research Institute, and we're grateful to have actually Sander, who's our lead partner, on the call with us as well. So I encourage at the end of this session if you have any questions, to ask Sander, as well as he's a very involved researcher, academic researcher in the space of accessible housing. So moving forward, we've developed this report, we've developed partnerships, and we're looking at developing what we're calling a mobilization network, which is essentially building an arena of policy analysts, researchers, service providers, people with lived experience, developers, and government who could essentially start working together and start identifying what we can do in Ontario to influence um, primarily new builds, but also looking at hanging fruit opportunity for accessible housing buildings as well as homes. Um, we're currently working on a toolkit in partnership with a Sunnybrook Research Institute, and Sander has put together a very comprehensive website where we're actually asking people in the community to start helping us identify accessibility solutions in the home. So if you have great ideas on how to make things accessible in the home, you can influence your expertise by participating in our toolkit. We've also are beginning to start looking at a variety of different research projects through Sander and other research partners um, to start answering some real questions that we don't know the answers to. Um, We've also recently completed in February a consensus conference that Sandra led as well, with 100 stakeholders trying to prioritize where we're going to move forward in terms of accessible housing as well. So what you're going to get from Spinal Cord Injury Ontario next month is what we're calling our directional report. All the aspects of what we're trying to achieve and what we've been able to explore and research and all the activities that we're working on, we're condensing them into a report that will live on our website, with a variety of different calls to actions and ways in which the community can participate, as well as a series of recommendations that we will be seeking in a government relations strategy to improve housing. So I'm happy to take any questions, but that's kind of the breadth of what we're doing right now. We've only been in this space as a priority for almost only 12 months. And the majority of it has been really understanding the landscape of the problem. So happy to take any questions, happy to entertain your thoughts. And Sander and Nicoletta, if you want to chime in on things that I've missed, I'm more than welcome to
Yeah,
give your
I just
perspectives
want to
as well.
jump in for a quick minute here. I'm Nicoletta. I work with Peter in public policy at SCIO. I just want to add that, you know, as crucial as the research bit is to all of this, one of the key things we do at SCIO is connect with community members like yourselves and others to tell the real stories of how the housing crisis is impacting real individuals. And so a part of my role is to tell those stories. So I want to throw it out there that if you're ever comfortable sharing your story about accessible housing, or you know somebody that would be comfortable speaking with us, please let us know, because it's those real stories that end up having the impact in the end. You know, of course, the data is so important for the government to see to implement the changes, but how these things impact real people is really, really crucial as well. So just want to throw that out there as well.
Good point.
Thanks, Nicoletta. Does anyone have any questions? There's nothing in the chat box as of now. And I don't see any hands. So maybe at this point, Peter is going to stick around for.
Maybe we can follow up. Julie, can we just follow up and provide you some resources and the link to some of our research studies as well as our website? So
Absolutely.
then those that are not here today and are looking at the recording have a place to look at what we've talked about.
Yep, absolutely. We can send out any information that you have. We can send it out to everyone that's registered.
Great.
Okay. And Peter is going to be around for the rest of the session. So if you don't think of anything now and you have a question at the end, please feel free to ask it. Now we do actually have one in the chat box. What do you offer to those looking for accessible housing in York Region, Richmond Hill? Oh, Paul, that was your question? Okay. And I don't know, Sheri, if this is better for Peter, who?
Yeah, I will defer from like the service component or existing outlets for accessible housing to Sheri, as we're looking more at the whole global umbrella of how do we create policy change.
Okay, and this is a great segue for you, Sheri.
Right, thank you. Thank you for having me, Julie. So as Julie said, my name is Sheri Upper. I'm one of the service navigation coordinators here for Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. I cover York Region and Muskoka, and I've been with the organization for 16 years and in social work for about 25 years now. And I can say that throughout my career, the issue of affordable housing and accessible housing has been predominant. I appreciate that we're now calling it a crisis, but I think we've been in a crisis state for a long time, is my own personal observation, and I think that is some of my colleagues. Jaspreet, I may ask you just to unmute folks for a minute. So Paul, obviously you've got an interest in looking for accessible and affordable housing. I wanted just to get a sense of who was on the call so I could sort of gear my comments towards being helpful for what we're going to talk about. I should preface this by saying I don't proclaim to be an expert on accessible housing or affordable housing so much as was asked to speak about what my experiences have been like in supporting clients in this particular area for our organization. So Xander, are you a researcher then, just kind of listening to Peter talk about you a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm the program research director at St. John's Rehab at Sunnybrook Hospital. I've been doing some work in housing. I started first looking at social housing for older adults living in Toronto community housing, finding that people with disabilities were having less successful tenancies, and then looked at the literature and really saw that there was a lack of evidence. And through time, sheer timing, connected with Peter and Nicoletta, and have just been trying to work collaboratively again to do research so that can support the advocacy, raise research dollars that can actually be used to help create products that will help the community, and just trying to find answers. So just came today as a fly on the wall to see just to keep my learning ongoing. So thanks for letting me join.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then Paul, apart from your question, which we will get to, is there anything else that you'd like to add or anything that you're hoping to hear about today when we're talking about affordable and accessible housing? And that may be a loaded question, I'll own that.
The unmute button should be, I believe, in the bottom left corner, possibly.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, I'm typing as you were talking, so I was like, okay, I can't multitask very well.
That's okay.
I just started working part-time again this year at Club Blink. I was last there in 2022. Last year I had to miss because I had a fourth surgery in March at Sunnybrook. And as a bonus, my surgeon retired in June. I'm still having issues, and I'm trying to walk through the process of finding who my new surgeon's going to be, because I got a feeling this is going to be an ongoing issue. With that said, I asked for any help I applied for York Region through their housing thing, and I chose a place, and I had to make sure it had accessible on it. But I was wondering if there's anything else any of you could suggest that, and I only put one location, but they've got many. So I was going to go back on the site. I just wanted to initialize my application because I know these things can take years. I want to get out of Toronto. I'm at Baby Eglinton, right by the SCIO. That's why I usually get sent by ambulance up to Sunnybrook, and 24 hours later I'm having surgery. So I'm also dealing with trauma of 4 surgeries in less than 10 years. And my last surgery last year really had a profound emotional impact on me that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. But in terms of housing and affordable housing, I live with my mother now, but I wanted to be as independent as I can. I'd like to get up into York Region because the golf course I'm at is Stouffville Road in Warden. So it's quite a distance up there. And I'm finding it difficult. I've had 3 medical suspensions for my driver's license that I've initiated myself before the doctors. I basically called and said, either you call the ministry and let them know what's going on, or I will. And I find that's a good way to get a doctor to send a letter to the ministry. Because if you're thinking if they don't, then the ministry gets a letter from me. The ministry is going to send a letter to my doctor saying, what the heck is a driver doing? Sending us a letter saying suspend your license. So I kind of had to learn that. I try and do it as civil as possible with my doctors, but the first couple times it was pretty tough when I was dealing with medical suspensions. But it sounds like you guys don't really have a way or any kind of assistance in helping, but you're starting to put like a program together to have better understanding and all that, and create
Yeah, and
partnerships and stuff.
would be on the advocacy level. So we do
Yeah,
have a number of different services here, right? So there's peer
yeah,
support, which is part of Peer Connections today. And then there's
yeah,
service navigation coordinators. So we used to be called regional service coordinators.
yeah,
Titles changed, the job has stayed the same, that our job is to support clients in really returning to independent living and whatever that looks like for them. And that's a very basic statement to cover what I feel is a very broad range of
yeah,
what we might do in our role. And when I meet with new clients, because I use humor a lot in my work, I always say there's not a lot I can't do except for personal care and driving you somewhere. Apart from that, ask me if I can do it, I'll do it. If I can't, I'll try
yeah,
to find the person who can. But housing is certainly something we spend a significant amount of time on, even with these wait lists that you're talking about. And you also identified something just sort of as a sidebar, but it really shouldn't be a sidebar, is that a lot of times, you know, clients do come to us, they've had the trauma of their spinal cord injury, however that may have occurred. We also know spinal cord injury doesn't exist in isolation from other things that have gone on in our lives. So there may be other trauma that they're carrying forward. And then add spinal cord injury, and maybe you can't return home. Maybe your housing was precarious prior to that. I'm working with a gentleman right now who, you know, was living paycheck to paycheck and then had his injury and now is in arrears for $7,000 of rent, which he cannot pay back and is going to be evicted.
yeah,
Right. So it's, you know, it's one thing to say, well, we're here to help out with housing, but it's more than just doing an application form, because we want to make sure clients are also supported if they are experiencing that trauma and need that emotional support. We're not necessarily the ones to provide that, but we certainly try to link clients with the resources that are free or low cost to make sure they're supported from what I call that holistic perspective. But I think, you know, based on what you said, and I'm going to call you iPad 19 because that's how you show up on my screen. If there's anything you want to jump in on in terms of what you're looking for, but do just a very brief overview of the majority of housing issues that we try to support clients through is this idea of affordable and accessible. But specifically, what I like to say is there is a distinction between what we would call affordable housing and what, in the eyes of the housing providers like York Region or Toronto Community Housing, what we call rent geared to income. So rent geared income means you are going to pay 30% of your income in rent, because that's sort of the standard. Nobody should be paying more than 30% of their the only thing I can't remember, my apologies, is if that's net or gross, but of our wages more than 30% on rent. So sometimes those terms affordable and geared to income, rent geared to income, get used interchangeably, but they can mean two very different things, because in York Region we'll also have what we call low-end market rent. So even though it's technically a market rent apartment and it's not geared to income, it's not necessarily going to be the $2,000 or $2,500 or $3,000 that some landlords are charging for rent.
yeah,
But typically what we do is we try to support clients with that process of applying for rent geared to income housing. And that process has changed over the years, not necessarily for the better, in my opinion. And my colleague Christine is on this call, and Christine, feel free to chime in as well. Because it's made it harder for some folks because it's all internet based. Not everybody has consistent access to internet or affordable access to internet with people whose first language may not be English, or people who are not comfortable using a computer. That can certainly be a barrier. You know, the pushback we've gotten is, well, you can go to a public library, but as we know, transportation can be an issue and a challenge. And if you're taking trans or paratransit system, it could take you 2 hours just to get to the library. So there's a whole host of issues. So that's why I'm really appreciative that in our role, we're allowed to support clients with that. I can come in with my laptop, we can do the application online, I can scan the documents and help upload them to their account. And that can also be a challenge sometimes too, is do people have the documentation that we need? Because when you're applying for geared to income housing, there are specific pieces of information that have to be provided, or they will not put you on the wait list. So one of them being proof of citizenship in Canada, so either your Canadian birth certificate or your permanent resident status for your Canadian citizenship card. So I worked with a gentleman who was a Canadian citizen, but unfortunately he had lost it in multiple moves, and he'd also been incarcerated and his belongings got thrown out. So there was that process of connecting with an ID clinic that could help us get that started before we could even get his name on the list. And then the other most important piece too is proof of income and notice of assessment. So not everybody files taxes. That can be for various reasons. Again, it can be lack of access to services to help you file income tax. Even though there are volunteer clinics that are held each year, not everybody knows about those clinics. Or I think about a client I'm working with, we tried 3 clinics and they were all full. So in the end, thankfully, I have a backdoor person who will do it for clients, but she's my last resort because I don't want to inundate her, and she's a licensed accountant. But again, access is a huge issue for our clients. So we can't move forward. And then a question we get asked quite frequently in our job is, how can I bump up my priority? And the sad reality is, I would say probably 90% of municipalities, unless you're living in an abusive relationship and then you have to try and provide proof of that abusive relationship, they will not prioritize your application. I'm not trying to say that housing providers don't care if you're facing homelessness or those sorts of things, but this is the criteria by which they go by. I believe many years ago, I don't know if it's the same in Hamilton, they might have prioritized if you had a terminal illness. But even with a priority rating on your application, it doesn't mean you're going to get housed within 6 to 12 months, because there's still far more demand than there is availability of units. And I had a quick look today just about some of the stats for York Region. And in 2021, York Regions Council declared housing a crisis then. And they said the average wait list for a geared to income apartment was 7 to 8 years. That was their little snippet from 2021. But if you go on to their guide booklet now, the average wait for a 1-bedroom apartment is 15 years. And it's very interesting. They don't even talk about what the average wait list is for a 1-bedroom wheelchair accessible unit, or a 2-bedroom, depending on what your needs are. Now, sometimes some ways to help offset the cost of rent, if you're able to find a place, but you're on ODSP and it's not enough, different regions have what's called rent supplement programs, but they work differently depending on the region that you're in. I cannot tell you why. I don't know the why. I just know that that's the way it is. So for example, in York Region, some buildings, which aren't part of the housing providers, but are part of the rent supplement program, you can apply to. Whereas in Barrie, which is where I live and have worked in the past, you can apply for the rent supplement if there's any rent supplement to be had. And then the federal government introduced a program called the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, or COB for short, again, to try and help bridge that gap between what people are receiving, low income and rent. But again, it's one of those where it's not where you can just necessarily go and apply. In Barrie, you can apply. In York Region, you have to be invited to apply. In Toronto, you have to be invited to apply, and you need to be on that wait list for housing. And then the kicker is, if you're on that wait list for housing, they take you off of the wait list for housing in order to be eligible for COB. But then you need to go back on that wait list for housing, because technically COB's only in effect until March 31st of 2029. So it makes it very, very challenging for a lot of folks that we work with, right, to be jumping through all these hoops. And another, I hope you don't think I'm being a negative Nelly so much as just sharing the realities, and these are the challenges that clients face. And if you're feeling this way or experiencing that, to at least hopefully normalize your experience that you're not the only one. Another challenge that we've been faced with is, I believe it was sometime during the COVID pandemic when they changed the number of opportunities you had to turn down a unit. So historically, you could apply for a unit and you could turn down an offer of housing 3 times. And my understanding is the provincial government, to clear up the wait list, changed that offer to just one offer. You turn that offer down, you're off the list. You can go back on it, but then you're at the bottom. So if you've waited 10 years, turn in an offer, you're back to the bottom of the list. So that was their way of clearing the wait list, but that really didn't do anything, because again, the need and the demand is still there. And the challenge with that too is you can't go and view the unit before you decide if you would like to put that unit on your application. Now, there will be on York Region's website, they try to provide as
Yeah.
much detail as possible, right? And Toronto as well. I'm not saying York's the only one. But again, I mean, it's like asking somebody to buy a house or buy a car without driving it, or asking you to get a wheelchair without sitting in it. How do you know that it's going to meet your specific needs? Now, the only caveat to that is, for example, if a person needs a roll-in shower and the building that you choose has a bathtub and you didn't like, they're not as up to date, they're getting better at updating which buildings have what type of bathing arrangements, if you will. Then that does not count as an offer of or does not count as a refusal, because that happened to one of my clients where she had to turn down the unit because she needed a wheel and shower, but we didn't know they didn't have one until the offer of the unit became available.
That sounds like a human rights violation too. If they took that as if they said, no, that's your one deterrent, like your one turn down.
Yes,
Sorry.
exactly.
That sounds like a human rights violation to me. So yeah. So I think they realize they can't do that because they then would get a
Yes.
whole bunch of human rights complaints. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And a big challenge that we face, and I think Peter may have touched on this a bit, is that, you know, we use the word accessible or universal design, but what does that really mean? Because we don't have any standards. So that's, again, a huge challenge for clients is, you know, what might work for one person may not work for another person. The turning radius may not be sufficient in the bathroom, depending on the size of your wheelchair and what type of wheelchair you have. Depending on whether or not you need attendant care services for most of activities of daily living, you may or may not require lowered cabinets and lowered kitchen cupboards and all those sorts of things, right? So that's also a real challenge that we face. I'm very excited about the work that Peter and the organization are doing, and I appreciate that it's not going to be a quick fix because there are so many moving pieces to it. But it's very exciting for me to at least see that it's somebody's finally taking the lead in addressing this, because it's been a historical issue for so long for so many people. Don't think I've left anything out, but certainly if you have any questions for me, because I don't want to invade on Vix's time and and any other questions folks might have. But anyhow, thank you for letting me speak. And any questions, feel free to ask. And if there's anything, I always say to clients, so I make this offer, if there's anything that comes to mind after today, please don't hesitate to shoot Julie an email and she can forward it on to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have if you think of it after today. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheri. There's nothing in the chat box. So why don't we go ahead? Again, Sheri will be here for the rest of the session. So if we want to go ahead and we can move on. So Vix, if you want to just introduce yourself, and then we're going to play, Vix did an interview with our Underestimated series. So we're going to play the video, and then if anyone has any questions, or Vix, if you want to add anything after the video, we can do that as well. So if you want to introduce yourself, and then I think Jaspreet has the video that we can play.
Okay, unfortunately, there's someone right outside my window doing some very loud yard work. So if that's disruptive, please let me know. But I'm Vix. I am someone with a dynamic disability, which basically just means that my support needs fluctuate on a moment-to-moment basis. And I use a wheelchair inside my home. When I need to go out, I use a wheelchair. I do have other mobility aids that I use. I also have cognitive and mental health disabilities as well. And I have been facing housing challenges for a very long time. I think it's been about 13 years that I've been facing housing challenges on and off. And it has taken a toll, a huge toll on me, but I'll talk more about that later. I'm also an artist and a streamer. I can't work a typical job due to my disabilities. So I spend a lot of my time online, just making the connections that I can. So I'm very grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Vix. Okay, Jaspreet, are you okay to play the video?
Yes, I am just sharing my screen with sound. Please let me know if you can see it and hear it.
Yep, we can see it. Yeah, we can hear it.
Beautiful.
Hello, Vix. Thanks for joining us. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your disability?
Yeah, so I was born premature and my health issues started then, and I didn't really get much help in my early childhood for much of anything. But in my adulthood, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, hypermobility, and a whole slew of mental health issues. And so I deal with chronic physical pain, nerve pain, joint pain, muscle pain, and fatigue, stomach issues, bladder issues, a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't work. I'm a streamer and an artist, and I try to also do nails when I can. And my focus for nails is other chronically ill people and people who may not be able to access nail salons. Yeah, it's a little bit about me. Well, accessible accommodations have been pretty much impossible to find. Firstly, financially, it's really out of my price range to find anything accessible. Looking for bungalows and things like that have just been impossible because it's completely out of my price range. So I've had to make compromises and think less about the accessibility and more just about affordability. And that has actually brought me out of Toronto because nothing in Toronto is accessible or affordable. So it's been very rough. When you're looking for housing, a lot of the listings will actually say we're looking for a young working professional or something like that. And even just looking at the listings, it's like very intimidating, and I'm afraid to actually disclose my disabilities and disclose the needs that I have. There was one time where I actually was able to set up a viewing, and my chosen sibling and my husband went with me. And they were talking with the landlord first, and the landlord seemed very kind and friendly. And then once I got out with my mobility aids, the attitude shifted. And it was like, oh, well, I don't really know if this is going to work out. And sure enough, we never got called back. We never got any responses after the viewing. And so it was very disheartening. And that's what a lot of the search has been. It's just been trying to put myself out there and then being denied and rejected. And, oh, we're concerned about your safety, they'll say, but they won't actually do anything to make accommodations or to make the place any safer. I spend a lot of my time just in my apartment alone and trying to connect with online people because I can't get out of my house independently and go to visit people. It's really rough. I already deal with mental health problems already, regardless of the housing search. But when I was actually actively searching for housing, it was taking a huge toll on my mental health. I was having mental breakdowns like every day, meltdowns, and it got to a point where I actually had to get out of the house that I was living in, and I had to stay with friends for a period of time because I was just in such a dark place, and it really felt hopeless. Like, I don't have anywhere to go, and what am I supposed to do? And so I had to really rely on support from my loved ones in order to survive that time. I'm really grateful for therapy that I've been through and having access to a counselor. And I was going to a few online support groups, specifically for disabled people, so that I really don't feel so alone with that. Really trying to use like video games and online community as my coping was really integral for surviving that time. I think one of the big ones basically is just being able to get in and out of the house without having to use stairs. Like if the house had a door that was wide enough to fit my mobility aids through and was on one level, that would be ideal. And then inside the house as well, being able to go into the bathroom or the kitchen or my bedroom with my mobility aids, having doors that are wide enough, flat surfaces, and things that are a bit lower, like counters that are a bit lower, and things like that, that I can actually reach myself. In my place that I'm in right now, in order to go out and do groceries or to go out and do anything really, my husband has to actually take my wheelchair, fold it up, put it in the car, and then help me up the stairs. And then I have various mobility aids that I need in order to go up and down the stairs. And by the time I'm through that, I'm exhausted. So I barely have any energy to go out and enjoy what I'm doing. And then when I'm actually in my home by myself, it's actually quite difficult to use the bathroom and to use like the things that are there, like my sink. Brushing my teeth is really difficult because it's quite high up. And so I have PSW services that come and help give me a shower and help make sure that I'm safe when I'm using the bathroom. I'm constantly budgeting my energy. Like if I'm planning to have a visitor or planning to go see someone, I have to consider how much energy it's going to take to use the bathroom and how much energy it's going to take to just use the stairs and get outside. And then will I have enough energy to actually do the thing that we're planning to do? It's exhausting.
Yeah, I think builders taking into account accessible accommodations is really important, not just for people with disabilities, but also seniors and others who could use things like that, right?
Absolutely. Find your supports, because trying to go through a housing search by yourself is really rough on your mental health. So finding those who can support you, whether it's online support groups or psychiatrists, mental health professionals, loved ones, but people who are understanding and who understand your accommodation needs and can help advocate for you as well. Disabled people exist. We exist in all shapes and forms and ages. We're not just the elderly, and it would be amazing to be able to raise a family in an accessible home, to have the things that I need. And it's really disheartening to see how many of the new houses and stuff are being built with, again, stairs, and just like even to go into a house, there's so many stairs. So please consider us, because there's a lot of us out there and we need accessibility. This is not just something that we want, this is something that we need for our well-being. And it would just be amazing to be able to live as a human being and share life with each other without having to be barred at every step.
So thank you so much, Vix, for, doing that video and just, allowing people to see the struggles that you go through every day just to get in and out of your house, which is something that so many people just take for granted, right? So thank you so much. And that was, as I think I mentioned, as an interview that Vix did for this underestimated series, that we've got lots of different topics that we interview individuals with lived experience on. So if we'll put our core tree link in the thank you email. So if you want to go on and check out more videos, you can. But Vix, if there's anything else you want to add or talk about,
yeah, the video pretty much covered it all. It's the range of accessibility issues are a lot, and like previous people on here have mentioned, it doesn't seem like Canada has standards that actually encompass all various types of disabilities and accessibility issues. So it's just, it is frustrating, and I would encourage anybody that is going through this, like I said in the video, to find support. I'm really grateful for this organization, for this support group that exists. I personally like video games, and so I've connected with people on twitch.com. And I also have an eating disorder. So there's an organization called Sheena's Place in Toronto that also offers support groups for people with eating disorders. And there is a disability-based group that I was getting quite a bit of support from before. So if you can find support groups wherever they are, loved ones, or like peer support, or I forget what Sheri's role is called, but professionals that can line you up to different support resources. It's basically impossible to go through this on your own. So yeah, I wish I had actual answers and solutions, but unfortunately, we're all in this together.
Thanks, Vic. And Peter, I think if it's a question or a comment, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, Vix, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story, and your video is amazing. You are the reason why we do the things that we do. And I'm more inspired than I was before on this call to make magic happen, to make these regulations and standard actually stick in Ontario. So I just wanted to thank you for your story, and to thank you for motivating me, and to continue to motivate me to make these things happen with the organization. We're daunted by this priority, but we're not shy of it whatsoever, and we want to make impact happen.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Peter.
Is there anyone else? Oh, we've got a question in the chat box. Does AODA not apply to rentals?
In my experience, landlords are very good at finding the loopholes and finding ways to get out of the AODA. It's also extremely difficult and challenging for somebody to access support if the AODA is broken. So in the past, I have a friend who is deafblind, who is a lawyer, who has supported me. I apologize, my son is getting changed in the background. But yeah, I've had a deafblind lawyer who is a friend of mine support me with certain AODA violations in the past. But for folks who don't have friends who are lawyers, or access to legal aid or legal support, it's very challenging to challenge the landlords. And even though discrimination against disabilities is not technically legal, landlords get away with it all the time. And unfortunately, like in my 13, however many years of continuously trying to find accessible housing, I faced a lot of discrimination, and unfortunately have not been able to get any, there doesn't seem to be any repercussions for the landlords or the housing organizations that are discriminating. But technically, legally, it does apply, and technically it is a thing. It's just very challenging to get it actually dealt with.
And I was just going to add to that, Vix, I can't remember if the AODA has looked at the built environment codes yet, because that's part of the, oops, sorry, I didn't realize I was standing, now I'm sitting, part of the challenge as well. And if you're in a like an existing rental building, apartment building, it's sometimes easier to get accommodations made that weren't there. So I think of a client that I was working with who couldn't get in and out of her building independently because there's a threshold at her apartment door, and then the actual unit, or at the unit door, pardon me, the actual apartment door was very heavy. But her spouse, they were both retired, so her spouse was there to help her out, but he died quite unexpectedly, so she was trapped in her apartment. So we basically wrote a letter to the landlord asking him to install an automatic door opener on the apartment door and to level the threshold at her unit door. And it was like pulling teeth, but in the end, I'm not a lawyer, but I relied on doing a lot of research, wrote a very strong letter that you have a duty to accommodate and you can't prove undue hardship. And he couldn't. But that was still probably at least a good 6 to 8 month process to get that in place. And you're right, unless you have access to supports and resources, it's very hard to make it happen. And when it's somebody's renting out their basement or their home, it's harder to to prove. And we don't have any, even for the standards that exist for the AODA, my experience has been there's no teeth for repercussions or for companies to be held liable. There, the penalty, nobody enforces the penalties and the fines. Despite several reviews of the AODA, our current government's done nothing to implement the recommendations to strengthen the legislation.
Yeah, one thing that has helped is getting occupational therapists to write letters, and again, finding supports to actually help advocate for you, because when you are just trying to advocate for yourself, sometimes the landlord can exert power or try to take advantage of you, and it can get discouraging.
Is there any other questions or comments? Or I see Peter's got a friend that has joined us.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to run and get him. I have the delivery coming in, and the dog was just ready to
Perfect.
attack him.
No worries. Was there any other questions or comments, or anyone else that wants to share any experience with us as well?
I left in the tail end of, is there AODA? What is the AODA regulation around accessible housing? The reality is there isn't one. There's no residential standard. There's a built environment standard for commercialization, but the residential standards sit with the municipality under zoning bylaws, which are extremely really weak. And we've been trying to work with the city of Toronto on how to appeal those processes through the tribunal.
Paul, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, yeah, two quick things. So with respect to the AODA, the golf course I'm at is not accessible, and I'm terrified to ask my employer to put a button on the main door, which is the only door I can use because the other three doors are just not accessible with walkers, great big steps, and just I don't even think about them. And the second thing is I saw Mr. Hidsig there. Anything to do with the Hidsig clinic at Sunnybrook? Is there a brain clinic there?
No,
No?
it's probably named something else. So no, it's
Okay.
got nothing to do with me.
All right.
Sorry.
I'm just curious. But yeah, that's tough to hear some of these stories about the AODA and how you're saying it doesn't really apply to housing. And again, I guess that's something as your organization would be good to kind of, approach government as an organization to say, listen, there needs to be more documentation in place and better access to making complaints and doing things, because every time I talk to my employer and I make a request, and I'm pretty good at it now. I've made accommodation requests, and I said, listen, it is my understanding that you have an obligation under Ontario human rights to accommodate up to a point of undue hardship. With that being said, I then submit my request and start talking. And I find it's really difficult to do that, especially when it's just me on my own. Because it's, if you're talking to an employer or to a company, wow, I find a lot of them don't understand what their obligations are. First of all, and that's why I say when I do my initial spiel, when I send an email or whatever, I said, it is my understanding that you have an obligation under the Ontario Human Rights Act, and I put the link to the Ontario Human Rights website in my email as part of my email correspondence. And I said, please refer to this before you reply, just in case you don't understand what I'm trying to ask for. So I try and do everything I can, but it's really difficult. And I can appreciate Vix, your video touched a place in my heart there. This is a new journey for me, and it's getting tougher after each surgery. I'm getting less and less able, and it's hard. I used to do everything. I used to run. I used to swim marathon. I had a motorcycle. I don't even have a dog anymore. I've had 2 golden retrievers, and I won't get another dog. It's too painful. That I found not having a dog to be one of the toughest things. Because I need to have a golden retriever in my life, but I need to go and do all those walks that I can't do. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough, but thank you very much. And this was an eye-opening Zoom. Time for lunch, people.
Well, thank you for sharing, Paul. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a tough topic, and I just want to thank everybody for coming on, and thank you to Peter and Nicola. Thank you to Sheri for your information, and Vix again. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. You know, as I always say, these peer connections, I think this is what they're all about, is just sharing experience and helping people learn, and having you know, people let us know, so that, you know, people like Peter and Nicoletta can, you know, see what they can do to help, because there's a lot out there, and housing is a big one. But again, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Jaspreet, thank you for doing all the background stuff. Just to let everybody know, our next peer connection is April 18th, and it's going to be on it's cannabis. How can it help? So we're going to have just peers on talking about how cannabis helps for them, what they use it for, whether it's sleep spasms, that sort of thing. So it's just going to be a conversation between peers. So if you're interested in checking that one out, just go onto our website and register. And as I said, all of this information, any links to our core tree page, so you can see some more of the videos, we will send that all in a email in about a week or two after this presentation. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.